This is the Ember Slave. In the smog-choked city of Haveth, Kale rises before dawn, dragging his groaning ash cart through the broken streets to survive another day. High above the filth, the gilded houses of the nobility catch the first light, glowing like a crown of fire over the suffering city below. Kale remembers a different life, the rhythmic thrum of his someone hammer and the melodic songs his mother sang, fueling the furnace with warmth. Now he sleeps against the cold stone of a ruined forge, pressing his trembling hand to the hearth, praying for a ghost of heat. Everything changed when the Lord's soldiers demanded weapons of death. His someone refusal was met with a chilling, silent smile. That night the forge became a tomb. Kale watched it burn, his name and family consumed, while those on the hill slept undisturbed. Years of abuse taught Kale to disappear, to fold his spirit inward until he felt like nothing more than a hollow, borrowed shell. Tonight, bored nobles torment someone his water, and crushing his fingers under their someone, Kale remains as silent as the stone. An old man emerges from the shadows, watching the scene with eyes like banked coals, waiting for the moment to move. He approaches the broken boy, his touch firm and seasoned, claiming that Kale is a coal waiting for the air to ignite. The stranger reveals a strange, pulsing light in his someone living ember that calls to the ashes of someone commands him to consume it. Kale stared at the smoldering ember, his instincts screaming to retreat, but the warmth trapped him in a tether he could no longer resist. His voice rattled like dry bones when he finally spoke, warning that accepting this strange, forbidden heat would likely be his end. The old man did not offer hollow comfort, instead pointing out that the fire had already consumed everything Kale had ever loved. He laid out the bleak reality of a life lived in service to the cruel, promising only a lonely death in a gutter if nothing changed. Kale remembered the ghost of his father's hammer and his mother's songs, realizing the hunger inside him had finally outgrown his fear. He reached out and claimed the ember, swallowing the cold, starlit light as if it were the missing piece of his own shattered soul. In an instant, the fire erupted within him like molten iron, forcing his body into a desperate, silent arch of unimaginable, transformative agony. Behind his eyes, he witnessed a primordial forge, where a vast, ancient presence beat light into being on a mountain-sized anvil. A voice like collapsing suns declared him the vessel of a dead god, a fire that had traveled through countless hands across the eons. He saw the line of his predecessors, all of them burned and broken, as they turned to acknowledge the latest soul to join their ranks. When dawn broke, Kale awoke to find that the fire had not killed him, but had woven itself into his skin as liquid gold armor. Kale bound his arms in thick, dirty rags, desperately trying to convince himself that the burning heat beneath his skin was nothing but a fevered dream. He hauled his ash cart through the gray streets, his eyes fixed on the ground to mask the brilliant, pulsing glow that flared whenever his rage flickered. Among the bowed, broken people of the market, Kale carried a god's fire in his arms, his heart heavy with the impossible weight of his dangerous secret. Alone in the dark, he peeled back the rags to reveal the gold light surging beneath his veins, and ventured to touch the long-dead coals of his hearth. The warmth he unleashed was undeniable, and a forbidden desire began to take root. He no longer wanted to hide what his newfound power could truly accomplish. Deep behind the tannery, Corvin appeared with his attendants, his cruel smile signaling the start of his favorite petty game of torment. As the crop swung down for a familiar strike, a sudden, fierce rebellion surged within Kale, sparking a fire that ignored all his past constraints. Corvin shrieked in shock as his weapon disintegrated into ash, his arrogance shattered by the sight of the glowing, impossible power bleeding from someone's skin. Kale bolted, running blindly through the labyrinth of the city, the light of his own power casting long, terrified shadows against the walls of his former prison. Up on the hill, Lord Varen listened to his son's panicked pleas, swirling his wine with a cold, calculated calm that promised only doom for the boy below. Hiding in the ruins of an old smithy, Kale realized with a shudder that his silent life was over. The hill would soon descend to snuff him out. Kale stumbled the ruined smithy, where the old man sits patiently amidst the shadows, waiting as if 4 days had never truly passed. The old man notes that Kale failed to contain his power, warning that Lord Someone men are coming before dawn to make a public example of him. Desperate to escape his life of running, Kale pleads for training, holding up his glowing, flickering hands beneath the encroaching darkness. Nodding slowly, the old man unveils his true nature, touching the cold hearth until it erupts into an impossible, radiant orange fire. Introducing himself as Bram, a smith from a fallen age, the master explains how to channel the fire rather than clumsily spilling it into the air. Kale mimics the technique, learning to coax the warmth into cold iron until the metal softens, sings, and begins to glow under his touch. As the night deepens, forgotten memories of his someone workshop surface, allowing something long hardened in someone's chest to finally begin to soften. Bram narrates tales of ancient gods and primal furnaces, weaving myths that steady someone resolve during these final, precious hours of the night. When asked why he chose a lowly ash hauler, Bram explains that the flame seeks the resilient, not the powerful, to ensure it won't be corrupted. Bram clarifies that Kale is no cursed object, but the heir to someone power, chosen specifically for his untapped potential and moral strength. The smithy doors shatter open to reveal Lord Someone's soldiers, but for the first time, Kale faces the approaching threat with steady, calm resolve. 6 soldiers crowded the broken entrance, their armor glinting beneath the torches as Kale felt his ancient, submissive instinct to kneel and wither away. Someone's voice shattered the silence, a command that swept away someone's old fear and demanded he stand and embrace the fire within him. When the lead soldier lunged, Kale simply closed his fist around the cold steel, watching as the blade melted like wax into glowing droplets. The forge's fire erupted from Kale's hands in raw, reckless arcs, forcing the trained killers to stumble backward in a desperate, panic-stricken scramble. As an axeman swung low, a wall of heat rippled from someone's skin, ruining the weapon and sending the attacker to the floor in pure terror. The old smith moved along the periphery, herding the survivors toward the exit, his voice cutting through the roar like a shepherd tending his flock. A crossbow bolt hissed through the darkness, aimed with lethal precision at Kale, who had tuned too slowly toward the lethal threat. Bram stepped into the path of the bolt with practiced calm, taking the strike meant for the boy into his own frail chest. Kale caught the falling old man, his grief-stricken fire flaring untamed and white-hot, casting a pitiless glare across the weeping, retreating soldiers. Even as Kale tried to pour his warmth into the wound to fix what was broken, the old man clutched his wrist, finding peace in this end. With his final breath, the teacher urged the boy to cease his hiding, to let the fire burn bright, and to finally be who he was. Kale found the old stillness behind his eyes, a cold silence that ignited into a terrifying, luminous heat in the wake of his mentor's final breath. He closed the man's eyes, honoring the simple grace learned in a past existence, as the mounting grief forged his spirit into something harder and sharper. The lingering soldiers, seeing the radiance erupting from Kale, fled the ruin in absolute panic, abandoning their posts like men escaping a collapsing dam. Kale remained kneeling, fighting the urge to let his inferno consume the city, choosing instead to tether his fury to a singular, righteous purpose. He stepped out into the freezing dawn, his rags disintegrating into ash as his skin fractured into channels of living, elemental fire. The folk of the below emerged from their hovels, shrinking back from the impossible light of a boy who had once been invisible to their eyes. Some feared him, making warding signs, but others straightened their bowed backs as he passed, recognizing the long-awaited turning of their world. Climbing higher, Kale finally understood that for his oppressors, the lives beneath them were merely a stain to be erased, not fellow souls. He marched past the gilded villas, his heat shattering the frost on every hedge, an army of burning reflections dancing in the polished glass. An old workmate stepped from a doorway, looking Kale dead in the eye with a final, desperate command, to burn it all for those left behind. Reaching the iron gates, Kale placed his burning hand against the metal, and the fortress finally began to know the heat of his judgment. The gates of the House of Varen surrendered to the heat, melting into rivers of slag as Kale stepped through the gap with silent, measured purpose. Arrows showered down toward him, but vanished into gentle, falling gray ash long before they could strike, leaving him untouched by the soldiers' desperate fear. Spears clattered to the ground as the flagstones turned white-hot beneath the boots of the charging soldiers, forcing them to scatter in a panic driven by raw agony. Corvin stood frozen at the stairs, his sword trembling in a bandaged hand, tears streaming down his face as he realized his vanity was no match for this fire. Kale looked at the young lord with a chilling stillness, neither striking him nor offering mercy, until Corvin collapsed against the wall to let the light pass. High above, Lord Varen witnessed his own security crumble, finally tasting the cold, suffocating terror he had spent his entire life forcing upon the people below. The master of the house desperately offered titles and gold, shifting blame onto his son while his own hands shook with the onset of true, gut-wrenching despair. Kale felt no need to voice his long-held grievances. The hammer and the memories of his family guided him with a patient, divine certainty of judgment. The house erupted with a purposeful flame, a construction of judgment that climbed the tapestries and beams to systematically erase every remnant of a cruel life. Kale descended the burning steps, leaving the wreckage behind to return for his mentor, intending to light a final, sacred pyre for those he had lost. As the sun rose, the city watched the hill burn, and in the crimson glow, a name was whispered among the people like the first spark of... And that's where the Ember Slave leaves us for now.